Thank you and welcome everyone to the Cabinet held on Wednesday 23rd of February, held via Teams, Microsoft Teams. The meeting, as you know, will be recorded and made available to view on the Council's website. Do we have a number of apologies?
Yes, we've received apologies from Christina Harry, Rob Tranter and Edmund Richards.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Okay, and all right, thank you very much for those. They'll be recorded. If I can go on to declarations of interest. Councillors and officers are reminded of their personal responsibility to declare any personal and/or prejudicial interest in respect of any item of business on the agenda in accordance with Local Government Act 2000, the Council's Constitution, and the Code of Conduct for both councillors and officers. Lisa, did you want to come in?
Yes, thanks, Leader. I'd like to declare a personal and prejudicial interest in item number 5. I have a family member who works for the construction company referred to in the report, so I'll leave for that item.
Okay, thanks ever so much, Lisa. Thank you for that. Does anyone else have anything to declare? No? Okay, great. Thank you ever so much. Okay, moving on then. The next item on the agenda is to approve and sign the minutes from Cabinet held 9th of February. I'll just go through page by page just to check for accuracy. Please shout if there are any glaring omissions or errors. Page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. And page 5. Okay, no comments. Okay, if I can have a mover and a seconder for those, please.
Move.
Yeah, thank you ever so much, Councillor Cook. Okay, and if I can have a show of hands, please, to affirm those. Thank you very much, everyone. They're carried. Okay, obviously, the next item on the agenda is to note the forward work programme. Has anyone noticed any errors or omissions again in relation to the forward work programme or propose any changes? No. Okay, if we can have a show of hands for those as well, please. Fantastic, thank you all. Okay, on to the first item on the agenda in terms of proper reports, and that is to receive the residential development proposal for the former Oakdale comprehensive school site. If I can hand over to Councillor Cook, please.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. The report in front of members outlines the proposed development of the former Oakdale comprehensive school site and seeks approval in principle to develop the site for Caerphilly Homes' first flagship mixed tenure residential development. The site would seek to accommodate a minimum of 100 homes. At least 50% of the homes would be affordable. In this context, refers to both social rent and low-cost home ownership. Homes should be future-ready, net zero carbon, recognising the climate emergency, and to comply with the authority's ambition to deliver a zero carbon borough by 2030. I therefore move the recommendations of 3 that members consider the content of the report and support in principle the development of the former Oakdale comprehensive school site by Caerphilly Homes. Support is subject to receipt and presentation of a detailed cost plan which will be available in autumn 2022, and members support the principle of appropriating the site from the general fund to the HRA at a cost to be determined by the district valuer. Thanks.
Thanks ever so much, Councillor Cook, and if I can go to Councillor Gordon, please.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. As Councillor Cook had just said, we're looking at carbon-free homes and 50% social and affordable housing. To me, it's a no-brainer, and I'm more than happy to second the recommendations.
Thank you ever so much, Councillor Gordon. Thank you very much for that. I've noticed that. Councillor Whitcomb.
I'll ask my question after the presentation, if I may, Leader.
Yeah, that's fine. I just wondered if there was something else you wanted to say. No problem. If I can go to Jane Roberts-Waite. I do believe you have a presentation, and if I can hand over to you, and I do believe you're joined by Craig Jones from Holder Mathias Architects in attendance today, and also Dan Jones from Wilmot Dixon. Yeah, so over to you, Jane.
Thank you, Leader. Just by way of an update as well, obviously these reports have been through the scrutiny process and members have had the opportunity to comment. With regards to the Oakdale proposal, there was one comment really that was fed back at scrutiny, which related to the mugger. And I'm sure there'll be a few other questions possibly at the end of this presentation on the situation with regards to the mugger at Oakdale. But Councillor Kirby requested that be resolved, that issue be resolved as soon as possible, which of course we will endeavour to do. The other thing I wanted to point out was that we've received an indicative value from the district valuer. We haven't had the full report as yet, and that value currently is £715,000. Okay. So without further ado, let me pass over to Dan Jones and he can take you through the scheme evolution. Thank you, members.
Over to you, Dan.
Morning, everybody. Can you see my screen okay? Excellent. So first of all, thanks for letting me come to speak to you today. My name's Daniel Jones. I'm the pre-construction project manager for Wilmot Dixon. So we are thrilled to be working closely with Caerphilly on this exciting scheme. I'm just going to give a sort of brief introduction to the site, hand over to Craig then, who will talk us through some of the design proposals, and then I'll finish up with the achievements and the next steps. So just as a bit of a recap, in terms of the project background, we're talking about the former Oakdale Comprehensive School up in Penmine. The main aims of this particular development to assist the borough with its targets by delivering the affordable social rented homes which needed, bring sustainable, high quality and energy efficient homes to the area, utilise the open market sales to create a cross-subsidy model to reduce overall capital expenditure, and put placemaking at the heart of everything we do on the site. So, you know, we're all working slightly differently at the minute, and it is very difficult to sort of gain an appreciation for this site on a sort of a two-dimensional plan. So we've sort of sent a drone up into the sky to try and bring a bit more context to what we're looking at. Of course, it doesn't beat doing a drive-by, but, you know, this is the sort of site. Some of you may know it. The characteristics are basically a nice flat plateau at the top, and then a sort of slight level change, then quite a steep level change down here to what used to be the sort of playing field at the bottom. So that's one of the sort of challenges that we're sort of picking up now with the detailed design in terms of making the most of this site and sort of fully utilising the existing level, so we don't have to have a massive earthworks scheme. So that's part of the ongoing development. A few other shots here, so you could see cross sections from different angles. Jane sort of mentioned the mugger there at the outset, and that is at the top, adjacent to Oakdale Terrace. So that's a little bit of background. I'm going to hand over to Craig now, who's going to sort of talk through the site.
Thanks, Dan. Good morning, everybody. Thanks again for asking us to be here this morning. One of the key things about this is in the evolution. This flagship scheme, as Jane mentioned, and the councillor mentioned. This is a continuation from the pilot sites. You're probably all aware of Trekennydd and Thomas and what's being done there at the moment. So those are pilot sites. So those are kind of proper homes in their own right, of course, aren't they? You might think that the pilot means some kind of research and development programme, but that's not the case. So the pilots are a bit of a test bed, but they are very, very successful in terms of what they're doing. And we all, and I speak on Dan's behalf and the whole team here, that we all have a pride in supporting Jane and all of your team in delivering this as a flagship scheme in Oakdale. So, you know, we're proud to be involved with it. And Dan mentioned placemaking just now, and that really is the heart of it. We're creating community for people. This is about stitching the existing all comprehensive school site into the Oakdale community. So permeability, accessibility, pedestrian and cycle links, very much part of this. This isn't to be seen as some kind of gated community on the hill. This is very much going to be knitted in and integrated into the community around Penmine Estate and Oakdale Terrace. And Dan has mentioned the topography, so I'm not going to dwell on that any further for today, other than say there are some challenges on the site. For those of you who know it or don't know it, the Oakdale Terrace is quite high at the top there compared to the bottom down near the B road that runs down the bottom and outside the site. So what we're going to be trying to do is to join the levels together so that we have one cohesive integrated site. So there's going to be no top and bottom, no us and them, none of that sort of thing. So from a community perspective, we've outlined the the at least 50% affordable through affordable or low cost home ownership, with pepper potted around the site. So it's not going to be certain tenures in certain areas. It'll be pepper potted around the site as an integrated community, which from a social value perspective is tremendous. And it's important that we make the site work hard to be able to enable us to do that. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, just a topographic survey on the right-hand side showing where the site is. Got Oakdale Terrace running on the right-hand side from the top right to the bottom right of your screen, and then the junction of Penmine Estate down towards the bottom right. You can see the old the mugger that Jane referred to on the right-hand side of our site adjacent to Oakdale Terrace, the old car park, and then the diagram on the left is quite a good one to show some of the levels in 3D. Thanks, Dan. So some of the initial concept work, you can see some of the images on the left-hand side, but it gives a bit of a flavour of the type of place that we're looking to create. So very much people-focused. It's about making sure that there are environments which are safe and welcoming and attractive for people. And that's what we're really trying to do. We do not want this to be classed as just another suburban housing estate. This is part of the grain of Oakdale, part of the integration with the community in Oakdale. And you can even see in that concept plan how there's an internal street which links the upper and lower plateaus. And you can see some of the almost like the light brown narrower paths running through the site, which are integrated cycle and pedestrian links. On that concept, we've got a play area. There's a storage lagoon which helps with floodwater or rainwater attenuation, I should say, down at the top of the screen. So I know it's a bit odd on topography, but the top of the screen is actually the lowest part of the site. As you go, the slope runs from the right-hand side of the diagram to the left-hand side down the hill. So you can see the storage lagoon, which helps with our rainwater. Also helps with biodiversity and ecology, and that's another thing, of course, that we're also trying to improve in today's climate. Thanks, Dan. An idea of how Oakdale Terrace works. On the left-hand side of that diagram, we've got the words pedestrian and cycle link. That's the entrance to Penmine Estate. So it's important that we knit in with that community and that street scene as well. Then provide a nice tight front on the lower half of Oakdale Terrace opposite the existing buildings. But the crossing and the entrance, and then maybe it's a little bit less formal as you go further up Oakdale Terrace towards the Rue and the road to the north. Thanks, Dan. This plan is an evolution of the sketch plan you saw a couple of minutes ago, and the reason we've included this, so this you might have seen, this actually forms part of the outline planning application. So this is going to be a formal drawing called a parameter plan. It's an illustrative site plan, so just give an indication of how the routes work. We've got the internal street, we've got some rain gardens which are important from a rainwater attenuation point of view. Important looking at building frontages onto the street, front doors at the front and not at the back. Car parking is either on plot or in discrete courtyards with well landscape features. Apartment blocks turn the corner, so you can see the entrance to Penmine Estate at the bottom of the screen. The main approach into the site off Oakdale Terrace, but halfway up on the right hand side. So it'll be apartments the way that we turn the corners, but most of it will be housing, and the tenure mix I think have been agreed with your Mark Jennings and the Wilmot Dixon team. Thanks, Dan. Some sections, just to give an impression of how this might pan out. Now, these are not easy to produce when you're looking at a straight line cut through a 3D site, but it just gives an impression of some of the gradient challenges that we have. And that's something the team is actively working on at the moment in the background to work with the site as efficiently as we can, so it doesn't cost any more than it needs to. But equally so, making decent places for people to live. So when you're looking at your kitchen window in the rear garden, you're not looking at a massive bank. And equally so, you've got a nice, safe environment for everybody to live in. Thanks, Dan. And just finish off with a few 3D sketches, just give a flavour of the type of scale and feel for the proposal. This is looking up Oakdale Terrace, so the junction into the existing Penmine estate immediately on the left-hand side there. And then you've got the row of properties, including the pub on the right-hand side, which I'm sure it will be popular for some residents. But the important thing here is that we enclose the street scene. And so we're a nice tight street scene on the left-hand side, pull the buildings on the front doors at the front, and that helps with community engagement and safety. Thanks, Dan. Main approach into the site off Oakdale Terrace. So again, we're looking at maybe different surfaces there rather than a sea of tarmac, but that will be developed in the detail in the next stage. And it's important that we've got a bit of a feature down the end of this, so a bit of a marker with the houses down the rear, which might be a little bit larger, be a bit symbolic. Thanks, Dan. Looking the other way down Oakdale Terrace, so we've got the crossing and the park area, green woodland area on your left. So this is the site, you got the Roo and the north behind you. And just talk about street enclosure and some of the kind of levels issues we have. But it's about people. That's the key thing here. It's about people. Yes, Oakdale Terrace is a road, but we need to make this place for people. And one of the way we do it, that integrate that in the community, is to put kind of people first wherever possible. Thanks, Dan. A view from the play area and the storage area down towards the bottom of the site, showing you can see the buildings occupying Oakdale Terrace at the top. And as it kind of sweeps round, you can see as it sweeps down the hill, and then on the right-hand side out the photo is the lower plateau. But the important thing here is to note that we've got properties lining the street scene all the way down. So there's not a top and a bottom and then nothing in the middle. So we've got active frontage, engagement, and some dwellings to create a nice street scene all the way down, overlooking the play area and kind of storage lagoon biodiversity area. Thanks, Dan.
Okay, thanks for that, Craig. I was just going to summarise on some of the good work that's been sort of done during 2021. So establish the scope and brief for the development, completion of the site surveys. This will help us enable the risks and abnormals and identify them and manage those out through the detailed design. The design progression to support the layout optioneering that has taken us to where we are. In terms of planning, we've had the pre-app submitted. That was September last year. The pre-planning application consultation undertaken in November last year, and then culminating with the outline planning submission, which was the 7th of December. We've also met with the SAB, submitted a pre-app, and held a really useful first meeting, which we look forward to continuing this year. And Welsh Government Technical Scrutiny, that meeting has been held, and again, we look forward to meeting with colleagues there during the coming months. In terms of the next steps, we're working to finalise the mix of homes on the site, including the density of apartments. This will help us pull together a final proposed site layout. In terms of the progress in the detailed design, areas such as site levels, important as we've discussed, SUDS features, the particular house layouts, elevations, materials, that type of thing, roads, footpaths, landscaping, and the community areas. So real sort of exciting couple of months ahead of us. Jane's touched on it, finalising the Mugger relocation. We are looking to achieve the planning approval in March and receive the valuation from the district valuer February, which Jane has alluded to. We'd like to carry on and complete the ecology surveys and the initial works that we've outlined on site in relation to ecology, and also look forward to developing the commercial model further with Caerphilly as the detailed design becomes available and enables us to do that. And then finally, target reserve matters planning application in the summer, with works looking to commence sort of autumn towards the end of the year. So that's it from us. I'll hand back to Jane now and stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Dan.
No problem.
Jane, did you want to come in?
Only to say, as we've already said, Leader, this is a very exciting development for Caerphilly, the first of its kind, which will set the bar in terms of how we move forward with our development programme. I've noted in the chat that the application is going to be discussed at committee on the 23rd of March. So that's obviously an incredibly important step for us. That will then enable us to draw down social housing grant as well, because we're seeking social housing grant for the acquisition, and we have to do that by the end of March. So yes, very exciting.
Thanks ever so much, Jane, for commenting on that. I've got a series of hands up here, so can I bring in Councillor Whitcomb first, please?
Thank you, Leader. And thank you, Councillor Cook, for presenting an excellent report which underlines Labour's commitment to social housing within this borough. I mean, I want to ask a question about the construction methodology and the post-construction carbon footprint that these houses are going to have. I'd like to have an idea about the carbon-friendly construct method, and then once these houses are completed, what is the carbon impact going to be? Thank you, Leader.
Okay, that's a very technical question, Councillor Whitcomb, and one which we're exploring at the moment. But what I can tell you is that on the pilot sites in Trew Thomas and Trew Kenneth, you'll remember that we used, or we are still using, a steel frame solution in order to deliver passive house accreditation and certification. So we intend to use the same type of envelope as we're using on those schemes on this scheme. The difference being, of course, is that passive house is an accredited certification. What we're trying to achieve here is net zero carbon, which doesn't just mean, obviously, the construction and the materials used in the construction, but also the in-use carbon and the ongoing carbon usage then that tenants will accumulate. So we're looking, therefore, at a completely different calculation, which is about looking at whole life net zero carbon. And that is something that we are researching at the moment with Holder Mathias and also with Wilmot Dixon. We're not there yet. It also involves us looking very carefully at our internal specification of work, because our current product specification doesn't look at net zero carbon, as you can imagine. So every single element of this scheme, whether it be the construction method, the materials used in that construction, our internal specification, and then the ongoing usage of these properties has to be tested in order to deliver this net zero carbon ambition. What I will say is that on a thermal efficiency perspective, our pilot sites, we were looking to deliver a thermal efficiency, I think, of about 0.6. The envelope that we've created in partnership with Wilmot Dixon and Holder Mathias is actually delivering 0.55, which is great. Which then means, of course, that tenants' bills are going to be much lower. And that, of course, is one of the objectives. So I can't give you an exact technical answer. I don't know whether Craig or Dan can perhaps add to that, but that's the ambition that we're looking for, and every single element will be tested. Okay. Dan, Craig, would you like to add anything to that?
Well, you've covered it nicely, Jane. What I was going to sort of just add is that we would undertake a whole life cycle costing exercise sort of up front, really, and as part of that exercise, it will then help us to make sure we select the right materials and the right technology to introduce into these houses. So that's sort of done up front, if you like, so that we don't do too much design first. So yeah, that's how we will look to achieve that.
If I could add to that as well, thanks, Jane and Dan. I think one of the things on the pilots was the idea of using modern methods of construction, or MMC. There's an acronym for everything these days, isn't there? So MMC is another one. And the idea behind that is that they're going to move away from kind of trades which are kind of wet, take time on site, and where there's a lot of literal construction on site, so that you try and minimise wastage. So it's kind of a developmental programme, and that's one that's hoping to be applied here as well. Jane mentioned the steel frame and the kind of way that can be recycled end of life. So it's important that it's actually the new technologies of construction, besides some of the obvious things that we're all aware of, like increased levels of thermal insulation and high performance and air tightness and that sort of thing. Ventilation systems are important, for example, so people don't have to open the window for a long time, and certainly not have to rely on that for fresh air. So that the conditions inside these homes will be very, very comfortable compared to maybe what most of us live in. And comfort of occupants, going back to the kind of passive house thing that Jane mentioned, is comfort of occupants, which is what started Passive House off in the first place. It wasn't just an energy thing for its own right as a scientific technical thing. It was actually about looking at the comfort of occupants. So you didn't have drafts, you didn't have the extremities of hot and cold and having to adjust your heating and that sort of thing. It was actually finding more of a temperate, equitable environment inside. So one thing about the pilots, which should be carried on here, is that there's a kind of real kind of drive and satisfaction in that the people who are going to be living in these dwellings, certainly in the pilots, the affordable, and certainly for the 50% affordable here in Oakdale, are those people who may be able to afford it, heating bills least. So they're going to be living in the most comfortable homes in your borough, and most highly advanced in terms of construction techniques, levels of environmental performance, air quality, comfort in the property as well as, of course, externally trying to create a really, really attractive place for people to live. So those are some of the objectives, and yeah, there's statistics and calculations and data which is being developed and supported all the time. Thanks.
Thanks, Craig, for adding further to that. Thank you. Councillor Pritchard.
Well, thank you, leader. And can I say, you know, what a great presentation that was. It was a pleasure to look at that. It looks a fantastic project. I think two things that have been mentioned: affordable housing up to 50% and net zero carbon. Music to my ears. Both of those two things we desperately need. I know I've said it many times, and I know everybody agrees. We desperately need more affordable housing, more council housing, and we certainly need net zero carbon, low emissions. As was previously been mentioned, we declared a climate emergency on June the 4th, 2019. I think this is another step in the right direction for us. It shows that we're working to achieve net zero carbon by 2030. A couple of weeks ago, we had a presentation on 21st century schools, in which one of the schools, close to my heart as well, is probably going to be the first net zero carbon school in our programme. Again, another fantastic way forward. The Trekennydd site has been mentioned. I go out on my walks quite regularly, and I pass the Trekennydd site on, I'd say, at least once a week. I can see that coming to fruition, you know, excellently. It's looking really nice. So again, I'd like to thank everybody for their efforts in making that scheme viable. It's already been alluded to, and I'm, you know, grateful to hear these comments. But in terms of as we know, energy bills are rising all the time, unfortunately. I think, Craig, you mentioned the fact that, you know, the occupants will be living in the new housing will probably be those least likely to be able to afford, you know, rising prices in energy. So maybe if I could just ask a question, I appreciate if there's not a definitive answer on this, but in terms of the way the design is being undertaken, what are going to be the sort of real term impacts on reducing energy bills for the occupants in the new development? Thank you, leader.
Okay, thanks. Shall I take that one, Jane and Dan, to start off with? If you read published research, councillor, on Passive House, they've been quoted correspondence. I know that energy unit rates have gone up, particularly with this kind of price cap stuff that's been in the news in the last few weeks. But you're talking of massive percentages of reduction in energy bills compared to if you live in a standard house. Even a standard house that was built to today's Part L building regulations. So if you can imagine a Part L house, building regs compliance sitting over here, and a passive house that we're building at Trekennydd and Thomas over here, kind of same area, same disposition, same plan layout, same everything else, then the difference in energy bills is actually significant. It's not like 5 or 10%. I don't know what the number actually is for today's Part L house versus that. But some of the published research on Passive House down the years has suggested that you're talking about 50–70% energy savings. Thinking that I read something from Passive House Trust not so long ago where it just happened to be in Scotland. It's not particular because of the climate. It happened to be in Scotland. Somebody had a temperature of 21 degrees and they went away for a week in the middle of winter and turned the heating off. Now, I don't know if you notice what your boiler thermostat does when you turn it off at 21 degrees in the winter in a normal house. certainly anything from the last century, the 30s or Victorian Georgian times. That will go down pretty rapidly, but after a week away, the internal temperature of the air in that house in the middle of winter was still 18 degrees. And that is, I think probably in my simple brain anyway, that was a really, really good indicator what that really means in real terms. So leave your heating off for a week in the middle of winter and come back and find actually the air temperature inside the thermostat is still reading 18 degrees is phenomenal. So things like modern methods of construction, it's not just about cutting down wastage and carbon miles and carbon energy and electricity usage in plants where materials are produced. And they see how often we've been on building sites in the past, not a Wilmot Dixon site, obviously, where you see skips full of stuff, plasterboard cut 3 times, copper piping cut 10 times. All these sorts of things is a kind of drive towards efficiency with modern methods construction, and Wilmot Dixon as a group, not blowing down the trumpet here, but I know they're at the forefront of that from a kind of a MMC point of view, and those are some of the kind of tools to be engaged. But that's before you get to the energy measuring of people's bills. But some passive house apartments, you're talking about energy bills on less than £100 a year, or that's been reported, because it depends on the unit rate, doesn't it? But that's a figure that's been published, so I'm not saying that's actually what it's going to be, but it's massively different compared to people who can afford it least, going back to your main point, are the people going to be least impacted by these energy rises, or where we get our gas from, or when the switch to renewables comes, and when nuclear or more electric power comes on board. And one thing worth commenting on here, there's no gas on this site. So it's all going to be everything's going to be electrically driven, which is where the drive from renewables comes from. So not able to give you definitive figures, councillor, but as a relativity thing, people in the affordable homes will be much better off than any other home they could probably move into than the existing stock in the borough or in Wales.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Leader.
Pleasure.
Yes, you're welcome. Thanks ever so much, Craig. Jane, did you want to come in and comment any further on that before I bring in Councillor Whiting?
Yes, please, Leader. Only to say that on the passive house sites in Trethomas and Trekennydd, members will recall that it's part funded by the Innovative Housing Programme. And as a consequence of that, there is, and we've installed, with the help of Wilmot Dixon, intelligent technology within the fabric of the building to actually assess its performance. And that information will be going back to Swansea University and also to Welsh Government. So we'll be very closely monitoring the efficiency of those buildings and hoping to learn from that and the materials that we've used in those buildings in order to apply that learning onto the Oakdale site with regards to our ambition to deliver net zero carbon.
Thanks ever so much, Jane. Thank you for that extra information. Councillor Whiting.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I just wanted to welcome the amount of thought that has gone into this. I think quite often when residents hear about a development going on somewhere, they kind of assume that it's one of those, hopefully we can call them old-fashioned, if they do go out of fashion, these housing estates where everybody's living in each other's garden and they can all see, and it's all, as many houses as possible can be packed into a tiny space, and that's not what's happening here. There's obviously that mix of tenure types as well, so you have that cohesion. There's the social side of this which is being looked at, not just the fact that this is essentially a product. It's so much more than that, and I think I just want to welcome that because it's so refreshing to see it, and I really hope that other developers sit up and take notice, and this is something that we see more often in Caerphilly and everywhere, to be honest.
Thanks ever so much, Councillor Whiting. 2 things from me. I mean, one was absolutely about having the highest possible rate of affordable housing on this site was, the main driver. We absolutely were aware of that. For me, it was also, and Jane will recall many conversations about this site, and for me, it's about, that we were clear that we should be innovative and pioneering, and that's what we've done. This is what we're doing here, and to be a flagship blueprint, whatever you want to call it, it's really, really important that we make this mark as an authority, and to see this, you know, and to see the drawings and the plans, you know, and thank you to Daniel and Craig for that and bringing those to life. You know, you know how important this site was to me. You know, I've been driving in the background through conversations, etc. So it is a pleasure to see this report today. It absolutely is, you know, and I think that the fact that it's gone on to be something much bigger, you know, in terms of the MMC element, you know, in terms of driving down carbon emissions for the whole life of the site is absolutely imperative. And again, it has to be the blueprint for the future, you know, and I'm really pleased that Caerphilly is leading the way on this, you know, and working in partnerships, you know, is key for that, because we need to bring in all strands to make sure that we do the best by the residents. And certainly, you know, in terms of Councillor Pritchard and Councillor Whitcomb's comments, and Councillor Whiting, in fact, you know, to draw on that fact that our affordable housing will benefit our residents, the most needy residents as well. But the mixed tenure is also important. And I think the way that it's been designed, it is, you know, to create a cohesive and you know, and a fantastic, vibrant community there. So more than happy to see this, and I won't make any whooping noises, but you know, I am absolutely over the moon to see this report today. I really am. So thank you. There are no further hands up, so I think we'll go to the vote. So Nadia, if you can bring up the form. And whilst that's working through, can I say thank you to Craig and Daniel and Jane. Thank you ever so much.
Pleasure. Thank you for giving us your time. Thank you.
No, brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Craig. Okay, I'm just checking that all the votes have come through. That's unanimous and that's been passed. So thank you very much, everyone. Okay. Okay, so we'll go on to the next item on the agenda, and that is, we're back over to Councillor Cook again, and we're very pleased to see the proposed redevelopment of the former T. Darren care home in Lisca. So if I hand over to Councillor Cook, please.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. The purpose of this report is to outline the proposed Caerphilly Homes development at the former T. Darren care home site and seek approval in principle to develop the site as an innovative later living scheme for older persons. This would be a flagship later living development, 60 plus, although there could be exceptions to this on medical grounds, which would set the standard for future provision of older persons accommodation. It will be a minimum of 40 homes, utilise modern methods of construction and a fabric first approach to achieve net zero carbon. Include bright and spacious communal areas that also encourage use by the local community and intergenerational activities, and include space that is flexible enough to accommodate community events. Therefore, I move the recommendation of 3 that members consider the content of the report and approve the development by Caerphilly Homes of the former T. Darren site in principle, subject to the receipt and presentation of a satisfactory cost plan, which will be available in the early summer 2022. Members also approve a decision to appropriate the site from the general fund of the HRA, in principle the cost to be determined by the district valuer, and to approve the proposal to move to the next stage of the project in order to determine the most suitable procurement route for this detailed design and construction phase of the project. I will now hand over to Jane and Nick for further comments.
Okay, and before I bring in, is in relation to the, do you want to come in now, Jane, and then we'll get Councillor Whiting to second.
Okay, I was just going to say, you know, again, we're talking here about a flagship development. We're currently at 46 units on this site, which will accommodate some of the tenants who are currently residing in our sheltered schemes that are going to be decommissioned. It's a massively important development. We're talking about a net zero carbon building again, but one that kind of facilitates that community interaction with the residents, and also a flagship later living, which is, you know, I think what we're all aspiring to later on in our lives. So again, I ask you to consider this one, members. We have had the valuation report back from the district valuer. We've had the full report on this site and the valuation is 800,000. Thank you.
Thanks ever so much, Jane. If I can go to Councillor Whiting.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I'm really pleased to be able to second this report. I think this proposal will be life-changing for the residents who move there from their current accommodation. It's going to be, again, I think so much thought has gone into this in terms of their day-to-day lives and the facilities they will need. It's going to be, well, flagship is the word for it, and I hope it again sets the standard of other things that we do in the future. It looks like it's going to be a truly special facility, which is amazing to see. You know, it's in my ward. The T Darren site has been an eyesore really for quite some time, and I'm really glad to see that, you know, and I'm really grateful to this Labour cabinet for all the work that it's done over the past several years behind the scenes. A lot of the time to get this through, we've had obstacles and you know, hurdles to overcome to bring this forward, but it's here now, and I'm really glad to see it, and I would like to thank everybody so far for this. I really look forward to seeing this coming through. I really do.
Thanks ever so much, Councillor Whiting. Councillor Richard.
Yeah, thanks, Leader. I just wanted to re-emphasise what Councillor Whiting has said in terms of this Labour administration, meaning business when it comes to net zero carbon. Again, we're seeing another development, a big development, net zero carbon, climate emergency 2019. You know, we mean business when it comes to climate change, and everything that I think that we do should have climate change at the forefront, which of course it is. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Richard. Councillor George.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, this is a fantastic opportunity for Rysca and the Lower Sarawi Valley. It's been a long time coming, but I think it's been the aspiration of the last Labour administration to redevelop this site, with something similar to the site that closed in 2010. I believe it was a Labour-controlled county council who originally built the site back in the late 60s, and it's pleasing to see that this administration is going to redevelop the site. It's not just a similar facility, but a much improved offer tailored to modern living. So thank you.
Thanks for that, Councillor George. Absolutely, as you say, it's the blueprint for the future, and it is the future of this type of housing. So without further ado, Jane, shall I bring you back in to talk to the report some more?
Yes, we've got Chris Wilkins with us, the architect from Pentan, who will take you through the scheme as it is currently. It has evolved somewhat and will continue to evolve. The point at which we're at now, though, and the report requests that we obtain an approval now to move to the next phase in terms of looking at an appropriate procurement route and appointing a construction partner. But Chris is with us, thankfully, from Pentan, and he can take us through the scheme in some more detail. Thank you, Leader.
Yeah, welcome, Chris, and thank you for joining us today. So without further ado, we'll hand over to you.
No problem at all, thanks. Let me share screen with you. Right. Does that come through for you guys? A nod of the head for someone?
Yes, it's there, thank you.
Brilliant, thanks. Yeah, well, I'm privileged to work on this with Jane and her colleagues, and I think all the superlatives have been used already. We've gone for exemplary later living in Caerphilly because I think certainly for the borough, but actually we see this as being exemplary throughout the nation as a whole, really, in both quality of life for residents and the net zero aspirations. I'll take you through kind of site location and a bit of the background to the project, and then we can get to the exciting things in a minute. I think you're probably all aware the existing care home facility sits in the centre of our site here. We're just to the north of the surgery, and kind of Rysca Town Centre proper is for the southeast there. We've got our kind of neighbouring health centre facility here, which is continuing to operate, and we were for a period sort of looking to partner with them, but progressing the project on our own now, and so we can move it forward much more quickly. And you can see just the sort of the wider context of landscape beyond there, the river running north-south there, and a fairly busy road running west southeast there. So I'll skip over that one briefly. In terms of the site as existing, nothing remarkable in terms of ecology, but actually one of the first principles that we're considering when we're looking at designing for net zero is the microclimate of the site, and principally that concerns us here is the orientation, aspect and orientation, getting as much from solar gain as we can, and making sure that we design to minimise summertime overheating as well. In terms of the existing trees on site, There are some that sit just beyond our boundary of the site here, which we'll be retaining, of course, and they offer a kind of a really pleasant green screen to the southeast corner there. There are a few in this section of the site here, which we'll come on to in a minute, which we're proposing to remove. And there's a really significant tree, lovely tree grouping up here, which we're retaining as one of the principles of design here. So surrounding kind of urban form, urban grain, there's not much in terms of a consistency in character or architectural quality in the site surrounds. Development has occurred over a long period of time, and there's not that kind of distinctive character here. So I suppose that's given us the freedom to take a fairly kind of new and bold approach, and I think absolutely fitting for the scheme that should be something to shout about, really. So let's just go underground for a minute. The site, although it looks kind of green, pleasant and open at the moment, there are a few nasties below ground, one of which is a culvert which cuts into our site just off the back of the main road there. And we've got some fairly significant sewer runs, as you can see here. One of which we felt was fairly divisive in terms of how it broke up the site, in terms of making a coherent proposal, making sure all residents kind of felt part of that community. So the proposition is that we will reroute that around the edge of the site, and that's one of the reasons, I think placemaking reasons are more significant, why a small number of those trees are going on that corner there. But what it does, it frees up much more kind of developable land and that we can make better use of as well, because it's constrained by that fairly divisive move there. So our kind of first principles of design here, starting to think about how we make places, how we engage with the surrounding context as well. So we're thinking very much of our more public areas here, or outlook and aspect onto St Mary's Street, running in front of the building here. To the rear of our site, where we're kind of scuppered by sewers and flood zones, is where we want to encourage some of that wider community engagement, and we'll come on to the detail of that in a minute. What that allows us to do is then essentially wrap the site with our accommodation and leave a more secluded, more private courtyard garden to the centre of the scheme, principally for resident use. We then start to look at how we break those forms down so that we're not just kind of landing at a big mass of a building on the site, and start to break them in appropriate places to allow views and vistas through. And to allow kind of aspects and sunlight into the courtyard at the centre of the scheme as well. Two kind of markers on this building as well, which start to speak of two key areas. The confluence of St Mary's Street and Ravenswood Court, I think, sits to the south here. That's a really prime corner for us, and that's where some of our key spaces for the residents' use in particular will sit. And then to the rear of the site, a smaller kind of building here sits on that kind of boundary between the residents' more private courtyard and the more kind of community spirited landscape spaces here, and we'll come on to what sort of fills those in a minute. Discussing massing, so you guys have an idea of the kind of the scale and form and massing of this scheme. Like I say, there's very little kind of context built form within close proximity to the building, and through detailed discussions with the local authority planning department. 3.5, 4-storey accommodation that wraps both of these sides has been absolutely thought to be appropriate here. We reduce that to the south, sort of west side of our courtyard here, so we get plenty of natural sunlight filling that space there. And we're a little bit lower, down to 3 stories on this northwestern edge here, just respecting our proximity to something that's kind of predominantly, well, 2 stories in the main with the healthcare building there. So let's kind of pop inside, really. That key corner of the building, which is predominantly for residents' communal use. So the idea is we're encouraging people to come out of their homes to get together, to meet, to get those social interactions that help health and well-being and kind of mental well-being so much. So we'll have a series of spaces that will include a sort of residents meeting lounge, gathering space on the ground floor, and that'll be a beautiful kind of double height really light, really lofty space, where if you've got relatives coming to meet, you can have a chat in there. There'll be little play areas for grandkids to play with their toys as well. I'm really trying to make it feel homely as well, actually, so that'll come through in the detail. And then as we move up through the building, spaces that allow residents access to IT provision, potentially further education opportunities, library reading spaces, workshop craft spaces as well. So we're trying to be flexible and cater for a range of interests so that all the residents on site really have something to kind of draw them out of their homes and get together. Moving quickly to the sort of other space, I suppose, that sits between our courtyard here and our community garden space here. We see this as a sort of a gathering space which you can get that intergenerational kind of engagement going in. So in other schemes that we've provided facilities like this, the local nursery or school might come and do classes here. They might use the kitchen gardens, the raised flower beds to think about lessons, but it just provides a fantastic life and activity to the scheme. This sort of space also big enough, large enough, flexible enough to allow all the residents of our scheme to gather as well. So if it's carols at Christmas, Christmas dinner, the rugby's on, the football's on, that's the space they could do that. It could also be kind of any sort of exercise classes that are brought in externally, and just the big kind of birthday party gatherings, that sort of space. All of our accommodation that wraps those three wings is linked by really generously wide external walkways. So when you come out of your apartment, you're entering into fresh air, you're covered, you're sheltered, but it's fresh air. And we want to move as far away from the kind of the old institutional models of double loaded corridors with no daylight, no natural ventilation in. Again, just for those health and well-being aspects, really. And we hope that the residents will start to appropriate those spaces, you know, from front door mat that says welcome on it to seats and flowers and plants on there that really kind of brings some almost life to the scheme that you'd get on a typical street, really. Moving quickly into the landscape quality spaces, where we've got sort of limitations in terms of more positive tree planting, then really creating some beautiful kind of perennial borders around that perimeter there that softens our sort of building as it meets the ground to the back of our prime streets. Orchard tree planting running to the northwestern and that corner down there. And then down here we've got bits of allotment gardens and raised kitchen gardens beds, and that's principally where we'd like the community to come in to help maintain and tend to them, but we also want the residents to come out and help as well. Excuse the cat. And then if we sort of dart into the centre of the scheme, the slightly more private communal garden at the heart, where lots of the activity and interest will be provided by our SUDS solutions to the scheme, and we're not about burying this below ground. Our first principle is to make that add amenity and landscape value as well as biodiversity value to the site as well. But through all these kind of examples here, whether they're relatively small scale or something slightly larger, they just add a brilliant extra aspect to the landscape at the centre of this scheme. Really quick kind of massing exercise, as you probably understand, this is currently under consideration for outline approval, and our next kind of body of work is to progress this into more detailed elevation and massing studies as well. But I think it kind of starts to hint at the life of the scheme, where you can start to see greenhouse and sheds and raised kitchen garden beds and the SUDS attenuation features in the centre of the scheme there. That's the kind of the landscape layout, so just adds a bit of colour and life to what you're seeing there. And you can see then we've got our walkways that wrap the perimeter here, and all of our apartments arranged off of that there. Skip over that briefly. I suppose the one thing we haven't really dwelt upon much is the environmental sustainability aspect, the aspiration for net zero. That's something we're really upping the detail level on at the moment. We've had workshops with Jane and her colleagues with embodied carbon assessors, operational carbon assessors, and we're focusing on both. So it's not just operational net zero we're going for, it's considering whole life carbon as well. And that's going to kind of impart key decisions in terms of what construction methods we use, how we procure this as well, to make sure we drive down our carbon consumption as low as absolutely possible. I think one of the things that this project will be exemplary in, and I think really hits home with everybody who we discuss the project, is about how great a place it will be for our residents to live in. So we're just sort of thinking about all those places that really make our new apartments a home, not just a kind of a house or an apartment. And it's about those threshold spaces, the ability to talk to your neighbours and engage with them. It's about having generous enough sort of entrance and storage areas as well. So that kind of, you know, all the things of life that you bring with you from your other home, you've got room there to accommodate. Having sheltered half in, half outside spaces so you can sit and enjoy the sunshine, but with a bit of cover as well. And every apartment will have access to their own individual kind of sheltered private outdoor space as well. And the ability within the home to have those flexible spaces that could still be for work or education. It could be the spare room where your family and friends come to stay, or if the need arises, where your carer can stay overnight. So we're trying to make them flexible enough so that they are really homes for life, and we can accommodate all kind of needs. And that's just some of the examples there of the options that we've been through and are looking at to explore the kind of the idea of the DQR plus model, to give that extra space within the apartment to be flexible enough to accommodate kind of lots of people's needs, really. I'll probably leave it there because it gets a bit wordy, but I'm really happy to field any questions you have.
Thank you, Chris, for taking us through that. I mean, wow. Again, you know, I think those sort of ideas for the designs and etc. are outstanding. You know, and it points in the right direction about creating homes. You know, very much future-proofing those homes as well, which is really, really important. But for me, it's that feeling of home. You know, and I think that's what we want to, you know, to bring out in this. And I think this is an outstanding idea. And again, I am very pleased to see this report here today because it's been a long time coming. You know, we've been on pause because of COVID, effectively, you know, for some things, but I know that there's been a vast amount of work that's gone on in the background to get this here today. So I am very grateful for your input there. Really love the design aspect and the philosophy behind it as well. I think it's outstanding, so thank you. Dave, did you want to come in? Dave Street.
Yeah, if I may, Leader, just for a few minutes, really. I share your enthusiasm. Social services closed TDI in 2011, and I don't think any of us ever thought it'd be 11 years later before we saw the proposals for this site. But having seen that and had previous conversations around it, it almost feels worth the wait. But what I'd like to take a few minutes just to say really is the challenges around this particular issue, and indeed the report that you saw before around Oakdale, have been enormous. If you talk to Jane about how we've overcome those, she'll quite rightly acknowledge the role of her team, but Jane's role in this has been absolutely pivotal. As you said, we've come through a pandemic. We've had less than ideal circumstances in housing. We've been out ahead of housing for almost a year. And those obstacles were overcome by Jane's sheer belligerence and desire to want to get this done. And there's no doubt at all that the reason the reports are with you this morning is as a result of that drive and commitment. And I think it's very important that we acknowledge that. Thank you.
And absolutely I would have done, but because I know the sheer determination that's gone on in the background, absolutely, you know, once the green light was given, you know, to lead on this, to go with it, absolutely that opportunity was taken. And, you know, I did offer to get my spade in the ground quite a while ago. I was happy to dig anywhere that I needed to in order to get this over the line. But no, all joking aside, you know, Jane knows I appreciate how much she has done in terms of another team. I know the team have been outstanding, but, you know, spearheaded by Jane, it's been fantastic. You know, and again, it's about doing the right thing, about creating homes for the future, isn't it? And absolutely, we were all on the same page there, and that makes it so much easier to actually fulfill this and to make sure we get it over the line. So the sheer determination from that sort of mutual respect and trust to get that done is being outstanding. So thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, we, yeah. just looking at all the comments flashing up here. So can I say again, thank you, and thanks Chris for coming along today and just talking us through those slides. It's great. And yeah, if you need me to put on a high-vis jacket and do anything, I will. Okay, but no more seriously, I am really happy to see this. There are no other hands up, so I think without further ado, if there's no other comments, we'll go to the vote. And if Nadia can bring up the voting cards, please. Just wait for all those to come through. Great, that's unanimous. Thank you. That's one step further to go ahead, to do all those other things now as detailed in the recommendation. So thanks all. Diolch yn fawr. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks. I'll leave you to it. See you.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you, everyone. That's amazing. Absolutely amazing. If I can go to the next report now, then, which is the Welsh Government Lease Scheme proposal, then I'll hand over to Councillor Cook again.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. The purpose of this report is to inform members of the current request from Welsh Government for local authorities to express an interest in a leasing scheme Wales. Members are requested to consider the report and agree on which of the two pathways the Housing Solution Team should adopt to take forward its private rented sector scheme. Should CCBC wish to adopt the LSW scheme, then it would need to disband the current private sector model, Caerphilly Quays. This model currently supports the Housing Solutions Team in meeting its statutory obligations and discharging homelessness duties in the private rental sector. I therefore move the recommendations at 3 and adopt option 2, which is to decline to express an interest in the leasing scheme Wales on the grounds that CCBC has a successful PRS scheme in place with Caerphilly Quays. Nick Taylor-Williams is in the meeting to answer any questions. Thank you, Leader.
Thanks, Councillor Cook. If I can go to Councillor George then, please.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I'm only too happy to second the scheme. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Councillor George. And if I could hand over to Nick Taylor-Williams, if there's anything you would like to add.
Just a couple of very quick points. A lot of it is embedded within the paper, but you'll see from the comparison, which is in the paper, we have looked long and hard at the Welsh Government leasing scheme and looked at the, I'd say, success of Caerphilly Quays since it was launched in 2018. We've had a number of landlords join the scheme. There's nearly over 100 properties now within the scheme. It's a very successful scheme. Welsh Government launched the leasing pilot in 2019 and Cabinet at that point decided not to participate. And then obviously the Welsh Government launched the full scheme earlier last year. So the comparison around the incentives on the scheme, when we went out to speak to the landlords that are within Caerphilly Quays, those incentives were not enough to enable them to switch. And I think if we did make the decision to switch to the Welsh Government leasing scheme, we would lose all those landlords and we would lose those properties and we'd be back at square one. So it's very clear our recommendation within the paper that to continue with Caerphilly Quays and not to express an interest to go with the Welsh Government leasing scheme.
Yeah, thank you for that, Nick. Really helpful. Are there any questions around this? Councillor Whitcomb.
It's not a question, Leader. It's more a statement of fact. It appears that we've led the way on this. This administration and our housing department have led the way on this, and Welsh Government have followed us. So I'm more than happy to support the option 2. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Whitcomb. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, absolutely. We all know the success that Caerphilly Quays has brought, and it has been very good, and we, as you said, we launched that in 2018. Just before the pandemic, we ran for a year before it all started. So really good to see this. The option 2 is the preferred option. So there are no other hands up. Okay, I think this is quite straightforward. And so without further ado, we'll go to the vote. Has it come up on the screen for everyone? It hasn't for me. Okay, that's come through now. Mine was in the sidebar for some reason. Okay, thank you. That's unanimous. Thank you ever so much, everyone. If we can go to the next report on the agenda, and that is the Welsh Government Retail, Leisure and Hospitality Rate Relief Scheme for 2022-23. And if I can hand over to Councillor Stenner, please.
Thank you, Leader. This report provides details of the new Retail, Leisure and Hospitality Rate Relief Scheme that was announced by Welsh Government for the 2022-23 financial year only. The authority must formally adopt the new scheme set out in the guidance at Appendix 1 of the report to obtain the Welsh Government grant funding. The recommendations are shown as 3.1.1 to 3.1.4. The reason for recommendations is to ensure that the authority complies with the grant conditions to obtain and fully utilise the grant funding in respect of any rate relief awarded under the Welsh Government scheme as detailed in the guidance set out at Appendix 1. I see that John Carpenter, the Revenues Finance Manager, is in attendance, so I don't know if there's anything he would like to expand on as the author of this report. Thank you, and I move those recommendations.
Okay, if I can just get the report seconded, and then we can bring in John. So if I can hand over to Councillor Whitcomb.
Yes, thank you, Leader. I'm more than happy to second the recommendations as outlined by Councillor Stenner.
Okay, thank you. John, if there's anything further you would like to add.
Good morning, Leader. Just to point out to members, obviously you will have read the report, but the amount of rate relief on offer now matches that offered in England for the coming financial year, and it is a reduction to a level of 50% for these retail, leisure and hospitality businesses. Previous 2 years saw them getting 100% rate relief. And also there will be a scheme whereby the businesses will have to declare that they, in applying for rate relief from any local authority in Wales, that the overall amount of rate relief that they would be looking to receive would not exceed a cap, which sits across all of Wales, of £110,000 for that financial year. So that complicates matters a little, and to that end we will be contacting those businesses who we have email addresses for in the coming weeks, making them aware of these changes, and also doing other publicity through the council's normal channels. And we're hard at work developing an online declaration form which will be accessible to businesses in a similar way to the business support grants that we've operated successfully during the pandemic.
Thanks ever so much for that, John. It's really important, isn't it, that we make sure that the business community are aware of the changes. You know, as you say, you'll do that through the usual council social media channels, our website, and obviously through email where you have it as well. Okay, because it's really important that they understand the changes, isn't it? And we communicate that. Yeah, thank you for that. Okay. Okay, are there any other comments in relation to this? I think it's a straightforward one in terms of the recommendations. Okay, all right then, we'll go to the vote. Thanks ever so much, John, for elaborating on that, because I think it's important, isn't it, that we ensure that we communicate the changes very succinctly. So thank you.
Thank you, Leader.
Is everyone able to vote then? Oh yeah, it's come through. Great, that's unanimous. Thank you ever so much, John. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Leader.
Okay, we'll hand back over to Councillor Stenner again for the whole authority revenue budget monitoring report as well. Thank you.
Thank you again, Leader. This report provides details of the projected whole authority revenue budget expenditure for the 2021-22 financial year. This report was presented to Policy and Resources Scrutiny Committee yesterday, and members asked questions on education and social services underspends. Officers provided answers to these questions, and Scrutiny meeting noted the report and endorsed the proposed ring fencing of underspends totalling £2.535 million. Scrutiny, I would like to bring to the attention of Cabinet that within the last week, Welsh Government has announced further funding of £50 million for the local government financial settlement across Wales for the current financial year. This additional one-off funding is intended to displace expenditure met through Council's own resources during the year to enable more flexibility in managing pressures moving forward. The additional funding is unhypothecated and can be carried forward in reserves. The funding will not be formally approved by the Senate until March, but it is anticipated that Caerphilly County Borough Council will receive circa £2.9 million. This additional sum will increase the projected underspend as detailed in the Whole Authority Revenue Budget Report. The recommendation is shown at 1.2.1 that this report is noted, and 1.2.2 that Cabinet agree the proposed ring fencing of underspends totalling £2.535 million as detailed in Appendix 2 of the report. I move.
Thank you so much, Councillor Stenner. Hypothecated, is it? Is that the one you were looking for? Okay. It's always a hard one when you have to say something like that. I have numerous words like that I can't even get out, so well done for even trying it. Okay, if we can go to Councillor Whiting.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I'm happy to second this report.
Okay. Are there any comments in relation to that? Okay, nothing. Okay, it's quite straightforward, and you've indicated the lateness of some of the details as well there as well. So I think that's really important to note. Okay, Steve Harris, is there any comment? Have you got anything further to add?
Yeah, just briefly, Leader. I think it's just important that I do stress that the levels of underspend that we're experiencing are not normal. Both last year and in the current year, we're seeing the ongoing impact of the pandemic on our financial position. And clearly the grants from Welsh Government are having a big effect as well. Councillor Sten has just mentioned the 2.9 million announced in the last week or so, and that's on the back of further announcements in respect to social care, which has obviously significantly increased the underspend in that area as well. There will be a further opportunity to look at the underspends when we present the provisional revenue budget outturn reports to both Cabinet and Council in July. So we'll work closely with members and with officers to identify proposals that will assist us in addressing our priorities and dealing with the pandemic moving forward. Thank you, Leader.
Absolutely, Stephen. Thank you for highlighting that. I mean, we're all fully aware of when the hardship fund ends and the fund in relation to that. So it's important that we've got that. So thank you for highlighting that. Okay, there are no hands up. There are no questions, no comments. In that case, we will go to the votes on that one. Thank you. Okay, that's unanimous, and thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, so the final report on the agenda today is the budget proposals for 2022-23 and the medium-term financial outlook. And if I can hand back to Councillor Stenner.
Thank you once again, Leader. The purpose of the report is to seek Cabinet endorsement of the 2022-23 budget proposals prior to final determination by Council on the 24th of February and to provide an update on the medium-term financial plan. I am pleased to say that despite having to find around £17 million to meet unavoidable inflationary cost pressures, the 2022-23 budget proposals include £9.6 million of investment and protects key frontline services from cuts. The original draft budget proposals presented to Cabinet on the 19th of January included a proposed council tax increase of 2.5%, which is well below the rate of inflation and the lowest increase for a number of years. However, we have listened to concerns raised and are conscious of the significant pressures on household budgets, so the final budget proposals now include a lower proposed increase in council tax of 1.9%. This equates to 45 pence weekly increase for a Band D property. I would like to briefly mention some of the headline figures included within the budget proposals, and these include £9.6 million of new investment for our key services. £5.7 million of this will be targeted specifically at social care services, including a pledge to pay the real living wage. We are investing £250,000 for a new Caerphilly County Borough apprenticeship scheme. We are making significant investment in public protection services to increase capacity in key teams such as trading standards, enforcement and environmental health. There is new investment in additional weed control measures to improve our street scene. We are proposing additional investment in the Community Safety Warden Service to help keep our community safe. And we are allocating £235,000 to help target flood prevention and protect vulnerable communities. Section 5.5 of the report in Appendix 3 provides details of the projected movement on general fund balances. This shows a projected balance for the general fund as at 31st of March 2022 of £14.516 million. However, Caerphilly County Borough Council's share of the additional funding of £50 million for the 2021-22 local government financial settlement that I referred to earlier will mean that the general fund projected balance will be circa £2.9 million higher than detailed in the 2022-23 budget proposal report. Given the range of financial uncertainties that we currently face, it is recommended that the projected general fund balance is noted at this stage and is reviewed again when the 2021-22 Provisional Revenue Budget Outturn Report is presented to Cabinet and Council in July 2022. It is important to stress that financial support through the Welsh Government COVID-19 Hardship Fund will cease on the 31st of March 2022, and local authorities will be required to meet ongoing financial pressures linked to the pandemic from the funding provided in the financial settlement. It is anticipated that additional costs will continue to be incurred in at least the short to medium term, and income levels will take some time to recover in a number of service areas as restrictions are eased. With this in mind, it is recommended that the Council's COVID-19 earmarked reserve is topped up to £5 million. Whilst the 8.5% uplift in the financial settlement for the 2022-23 year is welcomed, the indicative all-Wales settlement figures provided by Welsh Government for the subsequent 2 years are much lower at 3.5% and 2.4%. Appendix 5 of the report provides details of the updated medium-term financial outlook and shows a potential savings requirement of £9.759 million for the 2-year period 2023-24 to 2024-25. The Council's transformation programme and associated corporate reviews will be key components in addressing the projected financial gap. A report will be presented to Cabinet in early autumn, providing a further updated mid-term financial plan, alongside detailed proposals in terms of addressing the savings requirement moving forward. Cabinet is asked to endorse the recommendations as set out in paragraphs 3.1.1 to 3.1.7 of the report. I move.
Thank you, Councillor Stenner. And if I can go to Councillor Pritchard, please.
Yes, thank you, Leader, and thank you, Councillor Stenner, for that introduction, highlighting a number of schemes that are going to be proposed. I'd like to support our socialist budget. I'd like to support our budget that is an increase. We're proposing increases in spending, not cuts. It's not even a no cuts budget. It's an actual investment in services. And I know, Councillor Stenner, you've mentioned several, but I'll just go into a couple if I may, Leader. Well, a few actually within my own portfolio. First of all, the £235,000 to help target flood prevention. I mean, I've got members of the Senedd contacting me, rightly, asking me about what the local authority is doing in terms of combating flood prevention. Well, there's 235,000 extra proposed for flood prevention, and I would say at this point for all members, and I appreciate all members are concerned with flood prevention. The best way you can support flood prevention is to support the budget next week, which is indicating that we're going to propose £235,000 extra. Highways resurfacing, £2.2 million extra over previous years. Unfortunately, we have been in a position where we've looked to cut services. Well, £2.2 million extra for highways. Verge removal and creation of off-road car parking areas in Teesside, £400,000. Again, I know it's an issue that local members care about. £400,000 for that. Footway reconstruction, £300,000. Again, this gets raised on the doorstep many times when we're out on the door. Drainage schemes from priority list, an additional £300,000. Vehicle restraint system at Abercarn, £200,000. Cattle grid renewals, £100,000. Speed hump renewals, £100,000. And temporary for culverts to provide early warning of possible blockages, another £100,000. And Dollarvelin Street highway improvements, which I know myself and Councillor Cook have been pushing for a while, subject to residents' consultation, £100,000. Again, Leader, these are investments into key services, not cuts. It's a pleasure to support a socialist budget. So I will formally second, and thank you for letting me come in.
You're welcome. Thank you, Councillor Pritchard, for that. Councillor Whitcomb.
Thank you, Leader. I mean, I'm more than happy to support this very progressive budget. It's excellent to see, and I'm more than welcome the additional investment we're spending in investing in our young people in the area by widening our apprenticeship scheme. Apprenticeship schemes should be seen as a first step on a career path. They certainly were for me, having started my working career as an apprentice with a local authority and ended up as an academic dean. And well, what a surprise. But I think the overall budget is an investment in growth in our communities and our spaces, and I'm more than welcome it. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you so much, Councillor Whitcomb. Councillor Stenner.
Yeah, before we go to the vote on these proposals, I would just like to touch on the precarious financial situation some residents within the borough find themselves in. This cabinet has given a great deal of thought in the weeks leading up to the budget proposals being brought before us. We know that more than ever, there are families that are dealing with in-work poverty. And whilst the rise in council tax is far lower than it has been for many years, then there will be some residents who will find this a real concern. And I would just like to urge those residents to contact the authority if they find themselves in this situation. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Councillor Stenner. Yeah, absolutely. I suppose, what is clear here, we've developed a sound and sensible budget that will deliver for the residents of our borough. That is key, but I'd also echo your comment there, Councillor Stenner, in relation to working hard to support those residents as well. We are absolutely doing that through difficult times. Again, we indeed are protecting our key services here and shielding the community from cuts thanks to our prudent approach. And I think we really must stress that. This is a budget that I'm very proud of and I will endorse wholeheartedly, absolutely. And it goes without saying that effective budget planning does not happen by accident. Much work has gone on in the preparation of the budget over recent months, and indeed the foundations have been laid over recent years, thanks to the prudent and well-managed approach that this administration has adopted. The revised council tax, as you've just alluded to an increase to 1.9, also shows we are listening and responding to the feedback from our local people. So let's back the budget, and I think that's the most important message here, isn't it? Let's back that, you know, and hopefully through to council tomorrow evening that we get the support from our colleagues and members across the board. For me, this is, you know, again, we've supported the community through unprecedented times and challenging times, you know, and for me, this is the way forward in terms of this budget. So thank you very much, everyone, and thanks for your comments. Is there anything else anyone would like to make? No. Okay. In that case, it's quite straightforward, a standing budget, and I'd like to put on record my thanks to all the officers that have worked in the background to produce this. It's no mean feat, especially with you know, the late announcement of the settlement and having to work through quite quickly on this. So thank you one and all for all your efforts. That's unanimous, so thank you everyone, ever so much everyone, and thank you for your attendance today, and we can now end the meeting therein.